he did not ask for a pardon, but now President Trump says he did.
Also ahead this hour, Nazi symbolism and hateful rhetoric caught on tape among high school students. Details on the disturbing trend that shouldn't be ignored.
These stories are ahead here this hour. Welcome to our viewers in the U.S. and around the world. Coming to you live from Atlanta, I'm Natalie Allen.
And I'm George Howell from CNN World Headquarters. Newsroom starts right now. 4 a.m. on the U.S. East Coast. Fallout from the U.S. president's failed summit with North Korea's Kim Jong-un may have set off renewed tensions between the two countries.
Right, experts are saying satellite images show the North may be preparing a new launch. The images show activity at a rocket assembly facility and a launch site. The question now, what, if anything, will North Korea launch? Will Ripley is in Beijing for us. He traveled to North Korea several times and reported from that country. And you've been looking closely, Will, at what they may be doing. What are you learning?
So what we're seeing now for the first time are these satellite images from a facility just outside of the North Korean capital, Pyongyang, Sanumdong. And it is known to have been a place where they assemble intercontinental ballistic missiles, including missiles that are capable of reaching the U.S., and space rockets, similar to the ones that North Korea has launched in the past from the Sohae satellite launch facility, a facility that is now back to fully operational status, analysts say, after a flurry of work that has picked up in recent days post-Hanoi. Post the failed summit where President Trump walked out of talks with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, leaving him and his team bewildered and really a huge loss of face for the North Koreans. So what analysts are seeing is evidence that North Korea has assembled something, either a missile or a space rocket, put it on a train, and that train could be headed to Sohae or perhaps another launch site. We simply don't know at this stage. But if this is the case, North Korea could either be preparing to launch a satellite into space, they could be preparing to launch an intercontinental ballistic missile, although that has never happened from Sohae and is pretty unlikely, analysts tell me. Or this could all be some sort of a show for the benefit of spy satellites to try to get the attention of the United States. My experience in North Korea, they wouldn't go to this great of lengths for something that's just basically a ruse. It seems as if something is happening, which is a troubling sign that the bromance between President Trump and Kim Jong-un could be quickly crumbling.
Just one day after North Korean state TV showed an hour-long documentary touting what it called Kim Jong-un's triumphant and successful Hanoi summit, one full of red carpets and motorcades, handshakes and smiles, North Korean state media is changing course, admitting for the first time that no deal was reached and unloading on the U.S. over the failure, saying in a news story, quote, "The public at home and abroad are feeling regretful, blaming the U.S. for the summit that ended without an agreement."
They are definitely trying to make it seem as though they were ready to cut a deal, that they had a tremendous offer on the table for President Trump, and that it was President Trump who decided to walk away from what they saw as a very good deal.
Initially, both sides kept up a good face during the summit, with Kim telling reporters he would discuss getting rid of his nuclear weapons.
If I'm not willing to do that, I wouldn't be here right now.
But things went south, a source tells CNN, when the U.S. refused to lift all sanctions in exchange for Kim's offer to only shut down his main nuclear fuel factory, and President Trump walked away.
Sometimes you have to walk, and this was just one of those times.
North Korea says they only requested a partial lifting of sanctions. A planned signing ceremony was canceled, along with lunch, and Kim was left feeling bewildered, a source tells CNN. Today, President Trump held out hope the relationship he once described as falling in love won't now fall apart.
I would be surprised in a negative way if he did anything that was not per our understanding, but we'll see what happens.
Analysts say what's happening does not appear to be positive. At this North Korean facility, where rockets are tested, satellite photos show new activity. Kim had been dismantling it last year after tensions with the U.S. began to thaw. But by Saturday, the walls had been rebuilt. And by Wednesday, the roof was restored. A State Department official says the U.S. has not yet determined whether the site is now operational again, but is watching it closely and will ask North Korea for an explanation. Analysts say the big question now is whether the two leaders' relationship is broken or if they'll try to patch things up and reach a deal again.
What comes next? Was the Hanoi summit end of chapter 1 of diplomacy between the two countries, or was it the end of diplomacy between these two countries? And does something much worse, frankly, come next?
Reports that we're getting from inside North Korea is that U.S. sanctions are having a crippling effect, which means that Pyongyang does have an incentive to want to strike a deal with the U.S. And they have to be aware that any kind of launch, even a satellite launch, which they have long claimed would be solely for scientific research purposes, would be viewed as highly provocative by the U.S. and the rest of the world because satellite rockets use ICBM technology that's banned by the UN Security Council. But it could also be the feeling inside North Korea, George and Natalie, that Kim Jong-un needs to save face after President Trump not only snubbed him, but left him literally sitting at the table after he was 100% confident that he would leave Hanoi with a signed deal. And, it was really just a shocking and devastating blow for the U.S. to walk out, especially in the manner that they did, canceling lunch, leaving the table there empty, and leaving Kim Jong-un empty-handed and having to return home with nothing.
Right, and I'm just curious there, you're in Beijing. Has there been any reaction to China on this latest development coming out of North Korea, Will?
We haven't heard an official government reaction in terms of this potential preparations for a launch in North Korea, but interestingly, Chinese President Xi Jinping is reportedly now not planning to make a trip to the United States at the end of this month, which had been discussed because the Chinese authorities are worried that President Trump could walk out on him, much like he did Kim Jong-un, and they feel that that would be a diplomatic catastrophe for Xi to go to Mar-a-Lago and then have President Trump pull the same kind of thing that he did with Kim. So really, President Trump's credibility in terms of sitting down at the diplomatic table has been severely undermined as a result of what happened in Hanoi.
And we know you'll continue to watch what's happening in North Korea for us. Will Ripley, we appreciate your reporting. Will, thank you.
Once part of his inner circle, President Trump has been speaking out about two men who are now going to prison, and his comments about both of them couldn't be more different.
Right. Mr. Trump's harshest words are for his former attorney, Michael Cohen. He spent a decade by Mr. Trump's side and once bragged he'd take a bullet for his boss.
Contrast that with Paul Manafort. Manafort spent just a few months as Mr. Trump's campaign manager. For him, deep sympathy from the president. CNN's Caitlin Collins has this story.
Michael Cohen lied about the pardon.
President Trump in a battle for the truth with his former attorney and fixer today.
He's lied about a lot of things, but when he lied about the pardon, that was really a lie. And he knew all about pardons. His lawyers said that they went to my lawyers and asked for pardons.
Trump later claiming Michael Cohen, quote, directly asked me for a pardon. I said no. He lied again. The president escalating his attacks on Cohen's credibility after he testified last week that Trump lied about his business dealings with Russia and hush money payments to women.
And I have never asked for, nor would I accept, a pardon from President Trump.
Cohen quickly firing back, calling it just another set of lies. Trump going after Cohen after being asked about Paul Manafort, his former campaign chairman who was sentenced to almost 4 years in prison for cheating on his taxes and committing bank fraud.
I feel very badly for Paul Manafort. I think it's been a very, very tough time for him.
The president twisting the words of the judge who sentenced Manafort.
But if you notice, both his lawyer, a highly respected man, and a very highly respected judge, the judge said there was no collusion with Russia.
During Manafort's hearing, Judge T.S. Ellis drew a distinction between his crimes and the special counsel's investigation, noting Manafort was, quote, not before this court for anything having to do with collusion with the Russian government to influence the election. The president and his staff refusing to close the door on a pardon for Manafort.
Has the president ruled out a pardon for Paul Manafort?
I haven't discussed that with the president. I haven't heard him say that.
Now, as the president has gone about his job, sources tell CNN that he has become increasingly preoccupied with Michael Cohen. He brings him up minutes after national security briefings, during phone calls with lawmakers, and even during strategy sessions with aides discussing his administration's priorities. Sources say Michael Cohen is essentially this figure that looms over the White House right now. Caitlin Collins, CNN, the White House.
Caitlin, thank you. The Trump White House also losing another high-profile personality. In this case, it's Bill Shine. Bill Shine served as the top White House communications advisor. He's now leaving to join the Trump re-election campaign. Shine has been on the job now less than a year. Before that, he was a senior executive at Fox News.
Shine lost his sheen pretty early on. Apparently, President Trump was unhappy he didn't generate better news coverage for the White House. He is the 39th person in this administration to resign or be fired since Inauguration Day.
We have covered a lot, and to help parse through it all is Natasha Lindstad. Natasha, a professor of government at the University of Essex, joining us this hour. Good to have you, Natasha.
Thanks for having me on.
Let's start with the president's tweet about his former attorney, Michael Cohen, claiming that Cohen asked him for a pardon at one time, but during his sworn testimony, he said he never asked the president of that. Mr. Trump continuing here, Natasha, to needle on Cohen's credibility. What's your takeaway there?
Well, I mean, this news story isn't really good for either of them. Both Michael Cohen and Donald Trump have reputations for being liars. I mean, Trump in particular, the Washington Post has reported that he's lied or said misleading statements around 8,000 times. Michael Cohen has admitted that he has lied to Congress before. So both of them have real credibility issues. And the issue for Cohen is that he did directly say to Congress, no, I did not seek a pardon and I wouldn't have accepted it. But then his attorney recently stated that they were sort of inquiring about a pardon. And so there's questions about whether in the late spring of 2018, Michael Cohen's team might have been asking about a pardon. And I think the way that his legal team is going to spin this is that Michael Cohen will refute that he directly asked Trump for a pardon. That's what Trump, of course, has stated. And will say that he was possibly inquiring about a pardon before he decided to flip. And so that's the way he'll spin it. But Trump himself is talking about this pardon issue. But this is another thing that's going to be investigated because there are people that are concerned that Trump would be dangling pardons for people in exchange for their silence.
It does open new legal exposure for sure, Natasha. There's also the question about Manafort pardon. The White House seems to leave the door open there. Do you see that as a possibility as well?
Well, he's been vague about it, but this would be very politically unpopular. In fact, the Democratic senator from Connecticut, Blumenthal, has stated that this would be a political firestorm if he decided to pardon Manafort. I mean, and I think that Trump supporters do see some distinction between their love of Trump and Manafort, who has committed a series of financial crimes and didn't really get a very tough sentence. I mean, there's actually been more talk about the fact that he got a very, very short sentence, where there are all kinds of other cases of individuals who have been, put in prison for life for selling marijuana. Or there was a case that came out of a woman who committed voter fraud and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. And so I think from the public standpoint, there seems to be possibly an injustice here. And I don't think that there's a lot of support for Trump going ahead and pursuing a pardon with Manafort.
Speaking more on that, the guidelines for that sentencing were up to 24 years for Paul Manafort. A judge decided it would be just shy of 4 years. So the reaction has clearly been sharp from critics. Mr. Trump, though, says that it vindicates him as the case hung on financial fraud. It had nothing to do, he says, with collusion. He sees it as a win, Natasha. Does the president have a point here?
Well, of course he sees it as a win. He was trying to state, and I think in a misleading way, that the judge had stated that this had proved, that there wasn't any collusion going on. But it definitely does look like a small victory for him because the sentencing guidelines were much, much tougher. And Manafort went away with less than 4 years here. And the judge himself seemed to be very suspicious that the prosecutors were pursuing Manafort in a very, very tough manner in order to get him to cooperate with the Mueller investigation. And apparently the judge didn't like that. That didn't sit well with him. And he felt like just looking at Manafort in a more positive way, as you said, he had basically stated that Manafort had lived a life that was blameless and that he wasn't really someone that had committed many crimes before. This is ignoring the fact, of course, that Manafort had been lobbying illegally for some time now and had been committing a series of financial crimes for over a decade. But, the judge in the end went very, very soft on him. And Manafort, of course, though, has next week another sentencing that he'll have to deal with. And that judge may not go just as softly as Judge Ellis did recently.
All right, Natasha, we'll have to wait and see what happens there. Natasha Lindstad with Perspective. Thank you again.
Thanks for having me.
The U.S. actor who says he was attacked in a racist, anti-gay hate crime, Jussie Smollett, well, he now faces some major legal trouble.
A grand jury indicted him on multiple felony charges. Our Nick Watt has this story.
16 counts against Jussie Smollett. Basically, every crime he claimed he was a victim of is now a count against him. And you double it because prosecutors say that Jussie Smollett told his story twice, first to a police officer and then later to a detective, roughly the same story. He also went on Good Morning America and told the story as he saw it, he believed it, he wanted it to be heard. And what Jussie Smollett told police is that he was attacked by two men, one of them white, who threw a noose around his neck, threw a chemical over him, shouted racist and homophobic epithets at him. Now, two people were arrested, and those two people, who actually turned out to be African-American men, they told police and they told a grand jury that, in fact, Jussie Smollett had hired them to carry out this attack, had cut them a check for $3,500, that, in fact, they knew Jussie Smollett. Now, the superintendent of Chicago police, he says that he thinks the reason Jussie Smollett did this is he wasn't getting paid enough money to appear on the Empire TV show. He has since been written out of that show for the final 2 episodes of the current season. Now, even if he is convicted of all 16 counts, the sentencing guidelines are still just for the one crime, a class 4 felony. So that would be 2.5 years in jail or up to 3 years probation. Now, Jussie Smollett maintains his innocence, and we've heard from his lawyers who call this prosecutorial overkill. They say it's a redundant and vindictive indictment, and they say Jussie adamantly maintains his innocence. Nick Watt, CNN, Los Angeles.
Nick, thank you. Still ahead, Venezuela's most severe blackout continues. The cause is still unknown, but that hasn't stopped the government and the opposition from playing the blame game. We'll explain.
Also ahead here, he is a Twitter troll taking aim at his wife's boss repeatedly. That would be the U.S. president. Now, George Conway steps in front of the camera to throw shade at Donald Trump. Well, Venezuela, it's hard to believe that they continue to spiral downward. How much lower can they go? Rival protests are expected there in a few hours, one supporting the president, the other supporting the self-declared president. And this comes as the country recovers from its worst power outage ever that hit most of the country.
The government says a U.S. cyber attack took out a key power plant, but the opposition says money earmarked for electricity, that it was stolen by the government. Our Patrick Ottman has more from Caracas.
At first, Venezuelans could be forgiven for thinking it was just one more power outage. They happen here all the time. But then it went on and on. Before long, power was out in most of the country, one of the most widespread outages Venezuela has ever suffered, taking place at the same moment the socialist government battles with the U.S.-backed opposition over who should run the country. The government claimed without presenting evidence that the blackout was caused by sabotage, and the power would be back on soon.
We are working to reestablish service as soon as possible and defeat again this new attempt to black out the country and create chaos and destabilization in our country that is at peace. And I remind you, this is an attack to the government, this is an attack to the people.
Throughout the long night, Venezuelans did the best they could with what they had. Nurses at a Caracas hospital took turns squeezing manual ventilators to keep newborn babies breathing. CNN could not independently confirm the video, and when we went to the hospital, no one there wanted to speak with us. Opposition leader Juan Guaido said Venezuelans needed to make their anger known over the blackout at an anti-government protest planned for Saturday.
The whole nation is coming out to the streets. We will go back to the streets and we will not leave until we reach our goal.
Venezuelans took to the streets, but mainly to hunt down the bare necessities. You need electricity to pump gas, and this is the only station that we've seen so far that has its own generator. So people have lined up all the way down this street and all the way around the corner to pump gas in the country that has the world's greatest oil reserves. Alejandra said she waited for 3 hours.
This is madness. We live daily in the same circumstances. There are no services, there is no food, there is no medicine. This is a crazy nation.
Even with the lights out, the message is clear for everyone to see. Venezuela is falling apart. Patrick Ottman, CNN Caracas.
Patrick, thank you. Back here in the United States, the Trump administration has been dealt a legal blow in the battle over migrant families who are separated at the U.S. border.
A judge has ruled that thousands more migrants can be included in a class action lawsuit to reunite families. This comes after a watchdog report found thousands more children had been separated than previously acknowledged. Well, there is one conservative that gets a lot of attention on Twitter because he's a notable conservative, a respected lawyer, and he's also the husband of one of President Trump's senior advisors. He's also a major Twitter troll.
Talking about George Conway here, once again throwing shade at the U.S. president, but this time in a rare public appearance. Our Tom Foreman has this report.
Now, if people were to get indicted or not indicted on the basis of whether the president likes them, we wouldn't have a republic, we'd have a banana republic.
He did not use the president's name, but in an extremely rare public speaking appearance, George Conway tore into Donald Trump just the same.
And the president has suggested that members of his own Justice Department should be locked up for investigating the president.
Conway blasted Trump over his ideas on justice, his attacks on freedom of the press.
That's a problem of a quite different order of magnitude. You can't have a free country with that.
Conway has freely attacked the president for a long time, despite being married to top Trump advisor Kellyanne Conway. Just this past week, tweeting Trump is a fraud and an embarrassment, an inveterate liar, a narcissistic, sociopathic demagogue. Referring to the president's repeated, unproven claims of being a great student, Conway has tagged Trump summa cum liar, noting Trump's approach is to virtually never tell the truth when there is an opportunity to tell a lie, even offering an armchair diagnosis. It's pathological. It's an illness. The president has brushed him off before.
You mean Mr. Kellyanne Conway?
Suggesting George Conway's barbs are meaningless.
He's just trying to get publicity for himself.
Kellyanne Conway clearly squirms when confronted about differences with her husband, at times suggesting such questions are fundamentally sexist.
First of all, I would ask you that if you were a man and
no,
your
you
wife
wouldn't.
were 1,000% I would.
But George Conway continues to revel in the role of Trump troll-in-chief.
Plus, I kind of like the fact that you can tweet at rich public officials without fear of retribution in the courts.
Remember, this is no liberal, but a staunch conservative who says he has to speak up because he feels the rule of law is being so damaged by the Trump administration. And speak up, he surely did. Tom Foreman, CNN, Washington.
Keeps everyone wondering what's dinner table like at the Conway's house. Okay. All right, we move on here. A disturbing trend emerging anti-Semitism in the United States.
Why some high school students are adopting racist, even Nazi symbols. We'll take a look as Newsroom continues. Stay with us.
This is CNN Breaking News.
And welcome back to those of you watching here in the U.S. and around the world. This is CNN Newsroom. I'm Natalie Allen.
And I'm George Howell with the headlines we're following for you this hour. Keeping a watch on activity in North Korea. Two analysts tell CNN recent satellite imagery suggests North Korea may be preparing for a new rocket launch or missile launch. Even if it's a satellite launch, it would violate UN sanctions that would prohibit North Korea from using ICBM technology. It's been more than a year since North Korea conducted a missile or nuclear test.
President Trump is lashing out at his former attorney. He says Michael Cohen lied to Congress about never asking for a pardon. By contrast, Mr. Trump says he feels very badly for his former campaign manager, that's Paul Manafort. He was sentenced to almost 4 years in prison for financial crimes.
Venezuela, as that nation recovers from a major blackout, the country is also seeing rival protests in just a few hours. One for the sitting president and the other for the opposition leader. The cause of the blackout is still unknown, but Venezuela's government says the U.S. launched a cyber attack on a hydroelectric plant. The opposition blames the government instead.
President Trump is slamming Democrats after the passage of House resolution condemning hatred and intolerance, including anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim discrimination.
And I thought that vote was a disgrace, and so does everybody else if you get an honest answer. If you get an honest answer from politicians, they thought it was a disgrace. The Democrats have become an anti-Israel party. They've become an anti-Jewish party, and that's too bad.
The resolution was written in response to what some call anti-Semitic remarks by a Democratic House member. It was revised to include other forms of bigotry. 23 Republicans voted against it, arguing that it did not do enough to condemn Omar by name.
The freshman Democrat is one of the first Muslim women elected to the U.S. Congress. She's been under fire, even from fellow Democrats, for criticizing Israeli government actions. She's also been the target of anti-Muslim bias.
In the meantime, there is a rising tide of racism at U.S. high schools.
Yeah, this is highly disturbing. Some students are becoming more attracted to anti-Semitic acts and even Nazi symbols. CNN's Sarah Seidner has this for us.
Yeah, experts are telling us that they are seeing a disturbing trend among America's youth, their attraction to Nazi and racist symbolism. But you're going to meet one woman who survived the death camps, who says she's trying to solve the problem and steer them away from hate, one community at a time. High school students in Alabama spouting violent, racist, and anti-Semitic comments and enjoying every minute of it, then posting it on social media.
Without the Holocaust, what would the world be like?
We would have white people still. All of the numbers would not be here.
Jews would run the world. Holocaust.
Jews are fine
if the Holocaust never happened, Jews would be running the world right now.
It's fine. We just need gone. So
think about
mix
that.
Oreos.
Think about that.
What are you gonna do with them?
Awesome. You stick them in concentration camps.
You have to wait till they die off.
The girl you hear repeatedly saying the N-word sent out a statement on her father's car dealership Facebook page. The horrible, horrible things I said were a terrible attempt to be funny. I'm sorry to anyone that had to listen to the video. I will do everything in my power to be better each and every day. But this is just one example of a rising tide of hate among youth. The same week, thousands of miles away in upscale Newport Beach, California, high school students do a Nazi salute above a red cup swastika they created. Parties with a side of Nazi rhetoric seem to be popular with some teenagers these days.
What I saw was how the combination of ignorance, evil, shock, and peer validation can come together at a time when the social political landscape is about othering and polarization. And what happens is there's a race to the bottom because we don't have civic moral leadership in this country that sets a standard as to what's acceptable communally.
Brian Levin is a professor at Cal State San Bernardino and runs a Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism. He and other experts on the subject say there has been heavy recruiting by white nationalist groups in recent years on college campuses and grade schools. The Anti-Defamation League found in 2017, anti-Semitic incidents in K-12 schools increased by an astounding 94% after nearly doubling the year prior. And the FBI says between 2016 and 2017, reports of hate crimes against Jews skyrocketed, up 37%. Overall hate crimes reported, up 17%. While several white nationalists, KKK, and neo-Nazi groups are trying to disguise their hateful messages to make it more attractive to the mainstream, Levin says the youth are looking for shock and awe that's popular on social media. The behavior isn't just appearing at parties. Last month in New York, it appeared on a playground. And a new Nazi way to ask for a date to a dance in Minnetonka, Minnesota. She later apologized. Eva Schloss hopes she's an antidote to anti-Semitism among the youth. She is a Holocaust survivor, the stepsister of Anne Frank, whose story of surviving the Holocaust has haunted and inspired the world for more than 70 years. Schloss traveled to a Newport Beach high school just days after some of its students took part in the incident. She sat down privately with the offending students and their parents.
I just told them that the Nazis did really horrible, horrible thing, not just gassing Jewish people, but even their own disabled people. That was the first experiment with gassing children or people.
Schloss survived Auschwitz concentration camp at 16, but most of her family were annihilated by the Nazis, along with 6 million Jews. And now, more than 70 years after the attempt to exterminate so many human beings, she's faced with young people who think Nazi symbolism is all the rage.
How hurtful it was for many, many survivors of the Holocaust who have lost millions of their families all over the world, really, you know. I mean, it is an insult to those people.
Insult to you?
Yes, insult to me as well.
And lastly, are you afraid, now that you've seen young people doing this over and over and over again here in America, are you afraid for the next generations of people?
Well, there's so much education going on now, and it's going to be improved. It's going to be more and more. And I hope that eventually they will see the light, that it is not anymore acceptable. I'm still an optimist, you know. I think it can't go on that people do such evil acts. It must not happen, and it will not happen.
Eva Schloss did tell us that she was indeed shocked that in 2019, in a well-educated town with highly educated students, that incidents like this still occur. But when you speak to experts, they say that it will continue to occur across this country and abroad unless there is a strong push for education, not just by the school system, but by parents themselves and politicians as well. Back to you.
Sarah Seidner, thank you. Still ahead, getting closer to Brexit. The more uncertain we are about what it looks like, will it happen? These are the questions. We will speak with a senior Conservative Party member about what the British Prime Minister needs to do to lock down
southern United States yet again.
And our meteorologist Derek Van Dam is here to tell us about it. Derek?
This is after the unusual and extraordinary amount of tornadoes that occurred last weekend on Sunday that unfortunately caused 23 fatalities. And this one particular tornado in Lee County, that's near the border of Alabama and Georgia, that moved through the region on Sunday afternoon, was on the ground for over 70 miles. That was an incredible and very rare thing to happen. That's why it caused so much destruction and unfortunately the fatalities. This is just a recap of what took place last weekend. And the reason I bring it up is because today we have yet another chance of severe weather. But the good news here is that we're going to focus our attention away from the areas that were hardest hit last weekend. But that doesn't mean or belittle what's happening here or potentially happening across western Tennessee into northern Mississippi and extreme northwestern Alabama. That's where the hot spot is later today. We'll look out for that possibility of isolated strong to severe thunderstorms, some of which could spawn some tornadoes. Now, in the month of March, we typically see about 78 tornadoes across the entire U.S. Texas takes the reign there, 11 tornadoes on average for them. But you can see the deep south, including Florida, has a high frequency and high number of tornadoes this time of year as well. We're starting to get the clashes of season taking place. Cold air from the north, warm air from the south. We already have a line of thunderstorms moving across northeastern Oklahoma. That will enter into portions of Missouri and Arkansas within the next few hours. Severe storms lining up thanks to that low pressure system that continues to move through the area. Now look at the forecast radar. You can see that line just erupting later this afternoon. We get the daytime heating from the sun. That's where we start to focus our chance of severe storms. Now, the severe storm threat diminishes as we get into the day tomorrow, but nonetheless, we still have the probability of storms right along southern Georgia into the Florida Panhandle. Believe it or not done with this storm system just yet. There's another possibility, another threat of extremely heavy snowfall across the northern plains. Today in Minneapolis, we could pick up 8 to 12 inches of snowfall, which is more than their monthly average for the entire month of March. Look at the snow just wrapping throughout that area. An incredible amount of snow that has the potential to bring this city to a halt. In fact, they have had an extremely snowy season so far this year, but with upwards of a foot of snow expected, you can imagine that they're going to want to say goodbye and good riddance to winter because, wow, it is just the winter that never ends. The good news is we do have a bit of a warm-up along the East Coast, so if you are in New York today, D.C., temperatures will feel a lot better than what they did earlier in the work week and into next week as well. I think we'll see some of those temperatures rebounding nicely across the Great Lakes, my home state.
You know, George and I were just like, our mouths dropped open when you said that tornado was on the ground.
70 miles. Yeah, that's why it's so rare to see that. It was the worst tornado in Alabama since 1932. Very rare.
Wow.
Goodness.
Derek, thank you. All right.
And we will be right back.